When the Legends Die, Part 4, The Mountains. Chapter 42. He was the only passenger for Pagosa. The bus stopped, he got off, and the bus roared and went on toward Bayfield and Durango. He stood for a long minute looking up and down the street, which wound along the valley with its shops and stores on only the one side, facing the sharp slope at the foot of which flowed the San Juan. It was a tumbling mountain stream here, not really a river. It didn't become a river till it was joined by the Piedra down at Arboles at the southern edge of the reservation, and began to canyon its way into New Mexico. He looked up and down the street, wondering why he had come. It was only vaguely familiar, like a place in a long-forgotten dream. It wasn't home, but he had to come somewhere. He picked up his clothes bag and walked up the street, limping slightly. He was stiff and full of dull aches from the long ride in the bus. He wondered if he should have stayed another week in Denver, shrugged and dismissed that thought. 4 days had been long enough, 4 days to recover from the train ride. He couldn't afford to stay in Denver, even if he had wanted to. He looked for a restaurant, saw the sign, and mentally corrected himself. The cafe. He went in, set his clothes bag against the wall, and hung his hat on the peg just above it, and chose a stool at the counter, well away from the 4 men already there. The waitress, middle-aged, plain, friendly, and with obviously aching feet, brought a glass of water and a menu. He glanced at the menu, ordered coffee and a hot roast beef sandwich. She started toward the kitchen, and he called her back. "Cancel the sandwich. Make it a bowl of chili." She gave the order and brought a spoon and a paper napkin. He glanced down the counter at the other 4 men. They were watching him. All were in Levi's work clothes. He was conscious of his own clothes, the tan sport jacket, the brown striped shirt, the tailored gabardines, the fancy stitched boots. For years he had been stared at on the streets and hotels and restaurants, and it hadn't mattered. It was part of being what he was. Now he felt self-conscious. The waitress brought his chili, pushed the bowl of oyster crackers towards him, and the big shaker of coarsely ground red chili peppers. She brought his coffee and asked, "Come in from the east?" He nodded. "The washout's all fixed up the canyon?" "All fixed. There's a long detour between Bayfield and Durango." "I'm not going any further." He smiled at her. "I'm here." "Oh?" "I used to live around here." Unconsciously, he was trying to make contact with somebody, something. "Come back for a visit?" "I may stay a while." "There's worse places." She smiled and moved down the counter. The chili wasn't very good, too bland, even when he doctored it with the ground peppers. He tasted the coffee. Restaurant coffee. No, cafe coffee. But he drank it and he ate the chili. The waitress came back and he ordered some more coffee and lemon pie. It was cafe pie, too. He finished and went to the desk, and the waitress came to take his money. "Is it all right if I leave my clothes bag here a while?" he asked. "Nobody'll bother it." He put on his hat and went out into the street again. 2 men, Indians, were sitting on the curb in front of the hardware store. One glanced up, stared at him for a moment. He glanced at them and walked on past before he thought that the one who had looked up was someone he knew. He reached back, finally found a name. Luther. Luther who? He glanced over his shoulder. They were both watching him, saying something about him to each other, and the name came. Luther Spotted Dog, his one-time roommate, the boy he had thrown out of the room with all his gear and later had beaten up in a fight in the cow barn. Luther Spotted Dog, in worn, dirty Levi's, looking like a Skid Row character. He went on, came to a market. Thatcher's Market, the sign said. Thatcher's. Then he remembered. He stared through the big window. The place was all changed. A market now, not just a store. And another memory came back, of a boy and a bear cub and a crowd of men here in the street, right here, and the men threatening to kill the cub, and Jim Thatcher coming out and warning them to leave the 2 alone, both the boy and the cub. He was tempted to go in, see if Jim Thatcher was still there. Probably not. It was a long time ago. Even if he were there, Jim Thatcher probably wouldn't remember. What would it matter, even if he had? Tom turned away, went up the street, then came back. Luther Spotted Dog and the other men were gone. He crossed the street to a bench and started to sit down, then went on down the slope a little way toward the stream and sat down on the ground. A startled magpie flew squawking from a nearby aspen, long-tailed and strikingly black and white. He watched the water glinting in the sun as it splashed along its rocky bed. He had wondered all the way from Denver to Wolf Creek Pass what it would be like. Then, as the road wound steeply down from the pass, through the pines and aspens, the smells began to touch the quick of his being. The resinous pine smell, the damp wood smells, the clean smells of fast water. And it was almost painful the way it cut down through the layers of the years. He finally had to close his eyes and make himself aware of the bus smells to ease it, the odors of people and dust and hot oil and exhaust fumes. Then the bus began to pass small ranches and stream-side fishing camps and cabins that he could look again and smell again. Then, now, sitting here in the sun, watching the flashing stream, he found himself blocking out the sounds and smells of the street behind him. He sat there half an hour, then decided he'd better find some place to stay, a cheap room somewhere. But first he had to get some other clothes. In these, he looked like a millionaire dude. There wasn't any cheap rooms for anybody dressed like this. He went back across the street to the clothing store. A clerk, dressed like New York or Chicago, greeted him, and Tom said, "I need some work clothes." The clerk looked him over head to foot and asked, "What did you have in mind?" "Levi's." The clerk led him to a counter, showed him a pair of tight-cut, fancy-stitched denim pants. Tom shook his head. "Work clothes," he repeated, then glanced at himself. I'm got the dude kind," he said with a smile. Another man came in, a man in dusty Levi's and a black hat mottled with sweat stains. He stood at the desk while the clerk took Tom toward the back of the store to a pile of folded Levi cut for ease, not style. He chose a pair in Tom's size, held them up. Tom nodded. "And a couple of shirts and a brush jacket." The clerk asked his shirt size, brought the blue work shirts and short denim jacket. Tom tried it on, asked for more shoulder room, then asked, "Have you got a place where I can change?" The clerk took him to the fitting room, and Tom put on the work clothes, then came out and told the clerk he wanted a pair of plain work boots. While he was fitting the boots, the clerk asked, "You staying around here?" It was a conversational question. "I used to live around here." Then, with a smile, "I used to herd sheep over near Bayfield." The clerk chuckled. It was a joke, but he would go along with it. The dress boots Tom had just taken off cost $85 a pair, and the clerk knew it. And that mohair jacket must have cost at least $100. They went back to the desk, and the clerk carefully folded the mohair jacket and the gabardine slacks, the striped shirt, and packed them with the spare blue work shirt in a box. He wrapped the $85 boots. Tom paid his bill and turned to leave. The man who had come in while Tom was choosing the Levi said, "Did I hear you say you used to herd sheep?" "That's right," Tom smiled, sharing the joke with him. "You wouldn't know where I could find a good herder, would you?" Tom shook his head. Then, following the same impulse that had made him talk to the waitress, he asked, "What do you need a herder for at this time of year? Your flocks must all be out on grass by now." "They are, up on the summer range. But I lost a herder last week. Damn fool shot himself in the foot. Had gangrene. When my supply man found him, may lose his leg." "Where's this flock?" "On the Piedra, up on Horse Mountain. Good grass up there. Used to be, anyway." "Still is. You know that country?" "I've been there." "Your face is familiar. Do I know you? My name's Jim Woodward." "I'm Tom Black Bull," he said, the name without thinking. Woodward shook his head. "No, I guess not." He turned to the clerk. "You know a herder looking for a job, Henry?" Tom left them, went out, and started down the street. Then, on impulse, he turned back and met Jim Woodward as he was leaving the clothing store. "I'll take that flock for you," Tom said. "What?" Jim Woodward stared at him, unbelieving. Then he asked, "You mean that?" "Yes." "Well, I'll be damned." Woodward laughed. "I'm in the cafe a little while ago. I said you probably were an actor from that movie crowd over at Durango. If you don't mind my asking, what do you want to herd sheep for? The job is yours, but I'm just plain damn curious." "I've been laid up for a while, sick. I want to get out in the hills doing something that's not too hard work for a while." "How soon can you go?" "Any time, right now." "Well, come on. I've got a man from the home ranch up there holding the flock, but I need him in the hayfield. Throw your things in the pickup over there while I get a couple boxes of 30-30 shells. I'll be right with you."